Hi again. Last time round we looked at the Roman history of the Newark area. In 410 the British were asked to look after their own devices, leaving a bit of a power vacuum. So this time around we'll look at the Anglo Saxon and Viking period. The 5th to 8th centuries were what was once called the Dark Ages because there were so few written sources and archaeology to shed light on them. However, with the discoveries of the Sutton Hoo treasures and the Staffordshire Hoard, a spectacular new light has been shone on this time. The monk Gildas, writing in the 6th century religious tract, talks of the state of Britain, with the Saxons bringing a well-deserved judgment upon the local kings or tyrants. According to Gildas, following a period of peace after fighting off the Picts and Scotti, the Britons grew self-indulgent and lazy, leading to new attacks from the north. Following a council, it was agreed that land in the east would be given to the Saxons, who would defend the Britons in return for food. After complaining that the food supplies were inadequate, the Saxons broke the treaty and spread warfare from sea to sea. The war lasted 20 to 30 years until after the siege of Mons Badonicus, or Mount Baden. Gildas used the late Roman term foederati for the Saxons, which was a term used for people who came to Britain under a treaty system. This kind of treaty had been used elsewhere to bring people into the Roman Empire to work alongside the Roman army. Gildas described the corruption of the elite. Britain has kings, but they are tyrants. She has judges, but they are wicked. British leadership everywhere was immoral and the cause of the ruin of Britain, and according to him the Saxons were the judgment of God upon them. Our other literary source is Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, written around 731. He used Gildas and other now lost sources in writing his history. Bede identifies the migrants as Angles, Saxons and Jutes, and identified the homelands as shown on the map. Bede seems to identify three phases of settlement: an exploration phase, when mercenaries came to protect the resident population, a migration phase, and an establishment phase in which Anglo-Saxons started to control areas of Britain. Bede's description of the Britons is partly responsible for the view that they were downtrodden subjects of Anglo-Saxon oppression, and has led some to see it as a period of genocide, forced migration and slavery. Bede is one of the sources that tell us that the invaders were led by the legendary brothers Hengist and Horsa, who arrived at Ebbsfleet on the Isle of Thanet in Kent. At first they served as mercenaries for Vortigern, king of the Britons, but turned against him. Horsa was killed in battle against the Britons, but Hengist conquered Kent and became its first Jutish king. They were descended from Woden, the supreme Germanic god who became Odin for the later Norse people. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that Hengist and Horsa arrived in Kent in 449 and helped Vortigern to defeat the Picts. However, we have to be careful with our sources. Both of them were monks, and Bede was a monk at Jarrow in Northumberland and writes from both a religious and a Northumbrian Anglian perspective. This is also the time for King Arthur, who was first mentioned in the Historia Brittonum, a 9th century Latin history which listed 12 battles Arthur fought against the invading Saxons, culminating in the Battle of Baden, where Arthur is said to have killed 960 men single-handedly. Arthur is also mentioned in the Annals Cambriae, a 10th century manuscript which also links him to the Battle of Baden. Gildas and Bede both mention the battle, but not the name of Arthur, and he is not mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Despite the later 12th to 13th century romances written about Arthur in both Britain and France, and the many place names relating to him, there is no firm evidence to show he existed. However, a mythical warrior king lying asleep on the Isle of Avalon, waiting to be summoned at the time of Britain's greatest need, might just be comforting given our current situation. According to everything in the record so far, there should be archaeological evidence of battles and warrior burials found in spots across the country. However, this couldn't be further from what archaeology is actually telling us. There is very little evidence, if any, for large-scale conflict during this period, which has become known as the Migration period. Both pagan and later Christian Anglo-Saxon cemeteries have revealed few burials with battle-related injuries, although the men still like to be buried with their shields, spears and swords, showing their warrior qualities. Gildas and Bede suggest that there was an east-west split in the country, with the Saxons in the east and the Britons in the west. DNA studies have shown that this split does exist, and that there was also a linguistic split as well, with the east developing a Germanic language that became Old English, whilst the west retained a Brythonic language, still evident today in Wales, Cornwall and Brittany in northern France. Recent excavations at Tintagel in Cornwall, the mythical location for King Arthur's conception and birth, have revealed what appears to be a 6th century royal site, possibly related to the rulers of Dumnonia. Evidence of feasting and drinking have been found, with meals featuring pork, fish and oysters eaten off tableware from Turkey, washed down with wine taken from amphora, and drunk from decorated Spanish glassware. A stone inscribed with 7th century writing is etched with a combination of Latin writing, Greek letters and Christian symbols. The stone lends further weight to the theory that Tintagel was an important royal site, with connections stretching across Europe into the eastern Mediterranean. It would appear that the western side of Britain and Ireland, as evidenced by Tintagel, maintained its trading links with southern Europe and the Mediterranean, whilst the coast facing northern Europe traded with Germanic and Frankish partners. So the east-west split across Britain at this time may have been much more to do with who trade was being conducted with, rather than continuous warfare. If there had been a genocide of the native Britons, then the DNA should show that Anglo-Saxon DNA replaced the native marker, but this is not what is revealed. It now appears that the Anglo-Saxons arrived in the 5th century, possibly as a small warrior elite, bringing new ideas and a new culture to Britain. In many places, the Roman infrastructure continued in use for many years, and life would have continued much as it had for those in villages and farmsteads. As the Anglo-Saxons established political and social dominance, the Britons began to embrace their culture and intermarry with them. Although there were significant changes in the material culture, excavated grave goods have shown a mixture of Anglo-Saxon and native skills and techniques in their manufacture. Wooden houses have been in use from the late Roman period, while sunken floored rectangular houses known as Grubenhaus developed across northern Europe. The early Anglo-Saxon houses seem to have had some distinct differences. The Saxons went on to populate Essex, Sussex and Wessex, the Jutes Kent, the Isle of Wight and part of Hampshire, and the Angles East Anglia, Mercia and Northumbria. In Nottinghamshire, the distribution of early Saxon material culture, cemeteries and early place names is focused on the Trent Valley in South Nottinghamshire. This seems to indicate that early Anglo-Saxon immigration did not extend much beyond this area. The sparsity of evidence, together with this distribution, suggests that settlement was not by a mass movement, nor by penetration up the River Trent and its tributaries, but by piecemeal movement from the south and southeast. Although cemeteries bear witness to early Anglo-Saxon settlement, only about a dozen settlements can be identified. Even fewer Middle Saxon settlements have been recognised, and only at Southwell, Nottingham and Girton have substantial structural features been excavated. The cemeteries and this limited settlement evidence indicates that the landscape was not significantly transformed in the early and Middle Saxon periods. It appears that settlement was mainly dispersed across more or less reorganised Roman landscapes, but with a significant drop in population numbers. So what is the evidence from Newark? The existence of a pagan cremation cemetery close to the Fossway and Millgate have been known since 1724, when Lincolnshire antiquary William Stukeley reported the finding of 4 urns spaced evenly apart, containing burnt bones, ashes and beads. In 1836, during the construction of Southfield House, it was reported that 15 or 16 urns were taken out fairly complete, but 3 or 4 times that number were destroyed by the digging. The following year, the landowner reported finding around 20 more whilst digging the saw pit. But it was not until 1957 that more urns were recorded, resulting in a series of excavations over the next 20 years. Many of the finds were donated to the Newark Museum and are now stored in the Resource Centre or on display at the Civil War Centre. In 1989, a report on these excavations was compiled by Gavin Kinsley. It would appear that originally there were over 400 urns buried, dating to the 5th to 7th century, with 404 separate finds recorded by Kinsley. Many of the pots were decorated with a variety of stamped impressions and contained the bones and ashes of the deceased, along with grave goods that might be needed in the afterlife, such as bone combs, beads and toilet sets. At least one of the pots has zoomorphic boss decoration of a 4-limbed creature. The closest comparison is not found in Britain, but Suderbrarup near Flensburg in Schleswig-Holstein, in the land of the Angles. They're dated to late 4th to early 5th century. Grave goods in the pots include brooches, sleeve clasps, fragments of glass, vessels, melted glass beads, spindle whorls and gaming pieces. Toilet objects included tweezers, shears, blades and ear scoops. Some of these were large enough to be functional, such as the tweezers shown, but the shears and blades were too small and had no cutting edge. The toilet set on a ring consists of tweezers, shears and a blade and are also too small to have been of practical use. Different types of bone cones were found in the pots, many fragmentary, but a few more complete, such as this composite triangular example. There are fragments of double-sided cones with coarse and fine teeth on opposite sides. Both the cones and the toilet objects appear to be unburnt, so would have been deposited with the cremated bones when the pots were buried. Fragments of ivory rings made from elephant ivory came from female graves and may have been attached to the mouth of a long bag or purse, which hung from a belt and kept the mouth closed while not in use, but provided easy access when required. Looking after appearances was obviously important in the afterlife. At least 63 of the burials contained animal bones, with cattle, sheep, pig, horse and red deer identified. Sheep bones appear to be the most common. Similar cremation urns and grave goods have been found at a much larger early Anglo-Saxon cemetery at Lovedon Hill near Hough-on-the-Hill in Lincolnshire, where over 1,700 cremation burials have been excavated. The reuse of 4 Romano-British pots suggested the Roman settlement in Newark had been occupied, and excavations at Newark Castle in the 1990s found animal bones and early to mid-Anglo-Saxon pottery, loom weights and a pair of tweezers in what appears to have been a rubbish tip. Some of the pottery was similar to the burial urns from Millgate. Possible evidence was a sunken features house was found, but no other settlement evidence. Also from the 6th century is this bronze cross-shaped brooch with punched decoration around the edge, found at Brough, and a disc brooch with 4 red glass panels dating to the 6th century. Dating to the late 6th or early 7th century is this incomplete gold Lunayt pendant found by Maurice Richardson. The front of the pendant is decorated with a series of 8 figure-of-8 filigree motifs. The crescent shape probably comes from the motif of facing birds' heads, known in early medieval art in Anglo-Saxon England and on the continent. Coinage was adopted for exchange from around 625, and this seater is dated to 680 to 700. These coins come from the east and northeast of Kent and date to the reign of Hlothere, who reigned from AD 673 to 685. Copies are known from other parts of England which lacked their own coinage. In 1997, excavations by John Samuels on Winthorpe Road in advance of new housing found the grave of a wealthy and important early Anglo-Saxon woman. The grave was in an oval pit which may once have been a barrow with an enclosure ditch. It would once have been in a prime position close to the Fosse Way and close to the parish boundary. The grave goods, although rich, may once have been richer as the grave had been disturbed and possibly robbed. Artefacts included a decorated urn, a bronze-rimmed wooden bucket, and the rim is shown here, containing 3 corroded Roman coins, 2 pairs of silver hook and eye wrist clasps, a gilded bronze disc, perhaps once attached as decorated to a box or bag, 47 glass and amber beads from a necklace, an iron knife and fragments of an ivory ring similar to those found at Millgate. A lamb was also buried in the grave. The artefacts date the grave to the 6th or early 7th century. The occupant, apparently buried on her side, was a woman aged between the ages of 35 to 45. She was about 5 feet 8 inches tall for women of the period, and to judge from her bones and joints, she was robust and muscular. Given her stature, it has been suggested that she may have been either the leader or the wife of a leader of a local group, and buried close to a boundary to mark their ownership. The nearest Nottinghamshire parallel to this is a cremation burial excavated in the late 18th century at Oxton, some 10 kilometres north of the Trent. This involved another high-status female, accompanied by a bucket deposited beneath a mound. The finds from Winthorpe Road have been deposited with the museum since 2010, and some of the beads are on display in the Newark galleries. At this stage, the settlement would have been part of the territory of the Middle Angles. Power structure would have been very localised, with loyalty to a leader of a band of settlers, and there would have been no awareness of being part of a larger territory as there was later with the Kingdom of Mercia. In the early and Middle Saxon periods, what became Nottinghamshire occupied a strategic position as the border country between northern and southern England. From the beginning of the 7th century, the Kingdom of Mercia began to form. The name Mercia is Old English for boundary folk, and whilst it is generally presumed that this referred to the border with the Welsh, other interpretations suggest that it may refer to the frontier with Northumbria along the Trent Valley. Although the early boundaries are unclear, it is generally accepted that Mercia covered much of South Derbyshire, Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, Northamptonshire, Staffordshire, and northern Warwickshire. The earliest person named in any records as the king of Mercia is Creoda, who came to power around 584. He built a fortress at Tamworth, which became the seat of Mercia's kings. For 300 years, from 600 to 900, Mercia dominated England south of the River Humber, having annexed or gained submissions from 5 of the other 6 kingdoms of the Heptarchy, which were East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, and Wessex. This period is known as the Mersenne Supremacy. Mercia was a pagan kingdom until King Piada converted to Christianity around 656, with Christianity firmly established in the kingdom by the late 7th century. A battle on the River Idle and another on the River Trent are recorded in 616 and 679 respectively. Most famous, though, is the Battle of Heathfield in 633, in which Pendant of Mercia defeated and killed Edwin of Northumbria. The battle took place either on Hatfield Chase near Doncaster or near Cockney near Mansfield and Worksop, where there are also Hatfield place names. The Battle of Heathfield effectively secured Mercian control over Nottinghamshire and Lindsey. Although it was long believed the site of the battle was near Doncaster, in 1951 excavations at St Mary's Church in Cockney found a mass grave containing 200 adult male skeletons. The village of Edwinstowe is a few miles from Cockney, and it is said that Edwin's body rested there before being carried north to York. Edwinstowe means Edwin's resting place. The Battle of Hatfield Investigation Society continues to investigate to try and prove the Cockney location. However, the contest between Northumbria and Mercia was not finally settled until after the Battle of Trent in 679, when a lasting peace was broken by Theodore, Archbishop of Canterbury. This seems the most likely occasion for the establishment of the boundary between the two kingdoms. The most spectacular evidence for this period being anything other than dark are the Sutton Hoo and Staffordshire Hoard treasures. The burial mound at Sutton Hoo was excavated in 1939, and a spectacular ship burial was found with rich grave goods, including gold and garnet shoulder clasps, feasting equipment, and a helmet. The helmet demonstrates influence from earlier Roman cavalry helmets and also from Swedish helmets of the same date. The connection with Sweden and Scandinavia can be seen in a number of other items, including the shield and drinking horns, and is a reminder that East Anglia was the western shore of a Germanic culture that spread around the North Sea. Wider trade networks can be seen in the garnets that decorate many of the treasures, which most likely originated in Sri Lanka, and there are also items from the Byzantine Empire, Egypt, and all across Europe. Although it is clearly a pagan ritual burial, Christian imagery on some of the treasures show that this was a transition period from pagan to Christian beliefs. It is believed that the king buried here was Redwald, who ruled over East Anglia from 599 to 624. He fought at the Battle of the River Idle in 616, and after defeating Ethelfrith of Northumbria, was able to install Edwin as the new king of Northumbria. The Staffordshire Hoard was found by a metal detectorist near Lichfield in 2009, close to Roman Watling Street. It is the largest hoard of Anglo-Saxon gold and silver metalwork ever found, and consists of 3,500 items, with around 5.1 kilograms of gold and 1.4 kilograms of silver. Apart from 3 religious objects, the artefacts are all military in nature, including sword fittings and parts of a helmet. The hoard was most likely deposited in the 7th century, with artefacts manufactured in the 6th and 7th centuries. Many of the objects were decorated with garnet cloisonné work. In our collection, the gold and garnet cross, dated to the 7th century, was found by a metal detectorist in 2007. It is set with garnets and is similar in style to both the Sutton Hoo and Staffordshire Hoard treasures. A second gold and garnet pendant found at Halton is also dated to the 7th century. Excavations at Newcastle in the mid-1990s found evidence of late Anglo-Saxon settlement with the foundations of at least 2 houses. What was more evident was a Christian cemetery. Over 50 graves were found containing 20 children and over 30 adults. Some had been laid straight in the ground, others had been put into coffins made of flat slabs of stone, whilst others had boxes of stone slabs only around their heads. It had been reported in the 1830s that 100 burials had been disturbed on land close to the gatehouse when clearing land for the cattle market. So it would appear that there was a substantial cemetery there, with the recovered bones dated to 950 to 1070. Other to mid-late Saxon evidence comes from a silver strap end and a collection of over 20 clay loom weights from Shelford. In 793, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the first attack by Vikings on the monastery at Lindisfarne. A new group of raiders and settlers from across the North Sea would have an impact on the area and the naming of the town. Viking raids continued along the east coast, and in 850 they stayed over winter for the first time. In 865 the Great Heathen Army arrived in East Anglia and proceeded into Northumbria in 867, capturing York and establishing the Viking community of Jorvik. In 867 to 8, their winter headquarters were in Nottingham. They continued to attempt to conquer all the Saxon kingdoms, including Wessex, but following defeat at Ashdown near Reading in 871, retreated north again. During a 4-year-long campaign to conquer Mercia, the winter camp was at Torksey, just along the River Trent from Newark in 872 to 3, and Repton in Derbyshire in 873 to 4. Recent excavations at St Wiston's Church has found a mass grave and also that of a warrior, which may be that of the Viking leader Ivar the Boneless. Ivar was succeeded by Guthrum, who finished the campaign against Mercia. In 10 years, the Danes had gained control over East Anglia, Northumbria and Mercia, leaving just Wessex resisting. Following campaigns against King Alfred's Wessex, in which the Vikings first had the upper hand, in 878 Guthrum was finally defeated. He was baptised as a Christian, took the name Athelstan and returned to rule over East Anglia. In 884, a treaty between Alfred and Guthrum established the boundaries of the Danelaw, in which Danish law and Southall could be practised. Following Alfred's death in 899, his son Edward the Elder and daughter Ethelfled, the Lady of the Mercians, conquered Danish territories in the Midlands and East Anglia in a series of campaigns in the 910s. Alfred's grandson Athelstan continued the reconquest of Saxon territories and became king of a united England from 927 until his death in 939. The 5 Viking boroughs were Nottingham, Lincoln, Derby, Leicester and Stamford. Newark was at the centre of these boroughs, and although there is little material evidence of the Viking presence, there is place name evidence all around us. The suffix by meant a farmstead or settlement and can be seen in Barnby, Bleasby or Willoughby. The first part of the name is often a personal name, so Barnby was Bjarne's farmstead. Other common suffixes are Thorpe, which originally meant an overflow settlement such as a small hamlet. Holm is associated with an island, but often in the Danelaw came to mean farmland, reclaimed from marshy waste. Newark has many gates, and this relates to the Viking gata, meaning street. So Kirkgate is a street of the church, and Barnby Gate is a street leading to Bjarne's farmstead. We have very few Viking material objects in the collection, other than this enamelled brooch, which is dated to the 10th century, but may not be of Viking origin. This gold ingot may have been used as currency, as the Vikings would trade by the weight of gold or silver, so we find pieces of silver hacked into pieces to make up the correct weight. We also have a gaming piece, similar to this, which may have been used to play the game of Hnefatafl. The creation of a new burh, as fortified towns were called, at Newark secured an important strategic position. The Neue Werk, or new work, was coined to describe a new defensive work. Although the old work has not been firmly located, there are suggestions that an old work was noted on ancient maps not far from Newark towards Farndon. Another possibility is that Southwell may have been the old work, but this is far from certain. It's possible to suggest a number of dates for the founding of Newark, ranging from 918 to 954. Best clue at present is a coin of King Edwy, which is claimed to have a mint mark representing Newark. Edwy died in 957. It is believed that the Anglo-Saxon burh was focused on the current castle site and was enclosed by Kirkgate, Middlegate and Stodman Street. Excavations in and around the marketplace have revealed a lack of Anglo-Saxon objects which support this theory. Although there may have been an earlier Anglo-Saxon church beneath the foundations of St Mary Magdalene's, there is evidence that Syerston, Alston, Coddington and Newark Castle belonged to the parish of East Stoke in the Middle Ages. East Stoke once had a parish which extended over a wide area eastwards beyond Newark, and there may have been a church here long before one was built in Newark. There does appear to have been a stone-built Anglo-Saxon church at South Muscombe, dating to between 889 and 930. This is based on the piece of decorated limestone as shown, found in a field south of the current church in 1980. It has interlaced decoration that is also seen locally in the churches of Allington, East Bridgford, Hawksworth, Neasel, Rolleston and Shelston. It is likely to be from an impost, a horizontal moulding at the spring of an arch, and as two adjacent faces are decorated, it must have come from an opening, for instance that between the nave and the chancel. It shows that South Muscombe had a stone church before the conquest. The Archbishop of York was lord of the manor at the time of Doomsday, and so was no doubt responsible for building it. The Vikings returned in 1013, arriving in Gainsborough, led by Svein Forkbeard, King of Denmark. By the end of the year, he had been crowned King of England, but died at Gainsborough in February 1014, 5 weeks after having been crowned. His son, Canute, would return 2 years later in 1016, and go on to rule over a North Sea empire as King of England, Denmark, Norway, and parts of Sweden. Canute and his sons, Harold Harefoot and Harthacnut, ruled England for 26 years. After Harthacnut's death, the English throne reverted to the House of Wessex under Edward the Confessor, who reigned from 1042 to 1066. In 1041, Newark was rebuilt, and the town's name is recorded for the first time as Newark. The Mercian, Earl Leofric, was a friend and companion of Edward, and his wife, Lady Godiva, sister of the Sheriff of Lincoln, owned the manor of Newark. In 1055, she gave the manor to the monastery of St Mary at Stowe, near Lincoln. This will be important in the years to come. Next time, we will look at the arrival of the Normans and how Newark took the shape we can still recognise today during the medieval period.